Question 1. The mass of a piece of wood is 10 grams. The volume of the wood is 12.5 cubic centimeters. What is the density in grams per cubic centimeter of the piece of wood? So density equals mass by volume. They pretty much tell us that. And the mass is 10 grams divided by 12.5 cubic centimeters. Now, if this were a harder problem, I would say make sure that you check your units. But since this is number 1, they're not going to make it that hard. So just in your head, 10 out of 12.5, that's like 4/5. So the answer is going to be choice A. Question 2, the box plot summarizes the number of seats in the U.S. House of Representatives currently allocated to each of the 50 states. What is the median number of allocated seats in the House of Representatives? So this is a box plot and whisker diagram, box here, whiskers here. Really the only thing you have to know is right in the middle is always going to be the median, the middle value. Over here is going to be the highest value, so that's the max. Over here is going to be the minimum value, and the beginning of the box is always the 25th percentile. I think they call that Q1, and over here is always going to be the 75th percentile. That's really all you need to know for this type of diagram, and since they're asking for the median, it's obviously going to be 5. Question 3, a calf, the offspring of a cow, that's funny, they're actually defining what a calf is for you, weighed 62 pounds at birth. The calf is expected to gain 2 pounds every day for the first 2 years of its life. For this time period, which of the following types of functions best models the weight? So this is something the SAT expects you to know kind of just like off the bat by reading it. So in other words, if they start at 62 pounds and then they're going to gain 2 pounds every day, that's 2 pounds per day. If we let x equal the number of days, this is going to be the weight. And for the first 2 years of its life, this is really setting a range on the values for x. So 2 years is 365 days times 2. So that would tell you that x would have to be from, I guess, 1 all the way up to what's twice that? That's 730, I think. And so this is basically telling you what the range of x is. But regardless, this is question 3. You don't really have to know that much. All you have to know is that this type of function is linear, and it's obviously going to go up because y equals mx plus b. The slope is 2, and your y-intercept is going to be 62. So increasing linear is the answer. Question 4, we got 2 equations. It says, which of the following graphs in the xy plane represents the equations? So we kind of want to eyeball both the equations and the answer choices at the same time because this is number 4, so it's probably not going to be a lot of work. What I'm going to notice first is that both the first and second equation have negative slopes, which is going to eliminate choice A because negative slopes have to tilt this way. So A is going to be gone because of this guy. He's got a positive slope. I'm also going to eliminate choice C for this line over here, which is a positive slope. Now the question is it choice D or is it choice B? And looking at what the slopes are, I know that a slope of negative 1/2 actually has to be less steep than this slope. So this slope, which I've drawn at like a 45-degree angle to the horizontal or the vertical, this has a -1 slope. So anything less than or smaller in magnitude to -1 is gonna be flatter, meaning to say it's gonna tilt this way. So these two slopes, given that they're going more in this direction, in other words, they're steeper in the negative direction, I know has to have a slope of less than -1. When I say less than -1, I mean greater magnitude. So -2, -3, -4. So B is going to be out. And then when I look at choice D, I know automatically that this slope right here has to be the one with -1/2 because like I said, if you compare it to a slope with a -1 or a line with a -1 slope, this is shallower. So this is the 1/2, and this other line over here is the slope of -5. So you don't actually need to calculate the slope. You could also do that if you were to just compare like rise over run, and you just have to make sure you do that pretty precisely. The quality on this test is pretty bad, probably because it was reproduced, but that's how you can do it without really actually calculating the slope. So the answer is choice D. Question 5, blah, blah, blah. What is the value of x plus 4? So this is a type of problem where you could solve for x, but it's actually easier to just see this as the answer. In other words, when I look at this problem, I'm seeing a times b equals 36. So if I want to solve for b, all I'm going to do is I'm going to divide by 6 on both sides. That's going to leave me with x plus 4 equals 6. And since x plus 4 is what they want, that's the answer. Question 6. For a particular cross-country skier, each point in the scatter plot gives the skier's heart rate in beats per minute and the skier's oxygen uptake in liters per minute as measured at various points on a cross-country ski course. A line of best fit is shown. So we got heart rate down here, oxygen uptake up here, direct relationship. When the skier's heart rate was 85 beats per minute, so that's like, where is that? 90 is over here because it's between 80 and 100, so this is 85. Which of the following is closest to the difference between the skier's actual oxygen uptake and the skier's oxygen uptake predicted by the line of best fit? So we're at 85. The dot shows the actual oxygen uptake, which is 1. The line predicts right over here, which is about 0.5. So the difference between 1 and 0.5 is the vertical distance, and obviously 1 minus 0.5 is 0.5, so the answer is A. Question 7, we got 2 data sets, X and Y. It says data sets X and Y show the acidity or pH of rainwater samples from 2 different locations. Which statement about the mean pH of data set X and data set Y is true? So before you whip out your calculator, what you should notice is that there is a correspondence between each value in X and Y. So 5.5, 5.5, 5.6, 5.65, and 5.6. So basically every number in set X is also in set Y, but Y also has the addition of this value 4. What that means is that the average in set Y is going to be lower than the average in set X. Said another way, choice A, the mean of set X is greater than the mean of set Y, and that's the answer. 8 and 9 refer to this. The function models the length, f of t, in micrometers of a yeast cell of a certain strain t minutes after completing cell division for t between 0 and 30. So that's the length, and t is the minutes. What is the predicted length, rounded to the nearest tenth, of a micrometer of a yeast cell 10 minutes after completing cell division? So this is just simple plug it in. We've got, technically speaking, it's f of 10 equals 0.025 times 10, because that's the number of minutes, plus 10.30. Multiply anything by 10, you move the decimal place over 1, so that becomes 0.25 plus 10.30. 0.25 plus 0.30 is going to be 25 plus 30 is 55, so that's going to be 10.55. And rounded to the nearest tenth, we go up, so 10.6. Question 9, what is the best interpretation of the number 0.025 in the context of this model? So notice where 0.025 occurs, it's multiplied by t. So what that means is every time t increases by 1, t equals 1, t equals 2, t equals 3, you're multiplying that number by 0.025 and you're adding it to the starting value. So what that means is that every minute we're adding on another 0.25. So said another way, that's choice D. It's the increase in predicted length in micrometers of a yeast cell each minute after completing cell division. Looking at the other choices, A says the predicted length in micrometers of a cell before cell division starts. So before it starts, we're looking at 10.3. So that would be the answer for choice A. Choice B, the predicted length in micrometers of a yeast cell each minute after completing cell division. So to get the length each minute, you'd actually have to plug in t equals 1, 2, 3 into the function and then get the value f of t. So that's clearly not what 0.25 is. Choice C, the increase in the predicted length in micrometers of a yeast cell every 10.3 minutes. So to calculate that, you'd actually plug in 10.3 for the minutes and multiply it by 0.25. This number in itself will tell you what the actual increase is for every 10.3 minutes, and then you add that on to the original 10.3, and that's what you get. Question 10, Ivan plans to save up to $5 per day. The graph shows the possible amounts of money in dollars he saved after X days. Which ordered pair represents a possible amount of money he saved after X days? So the key phrase here is that he's saving up to $5 per day. So I don't know if this graph should be shaded. It may be. But if you look at how it works, notice after 2 days, if you're saving $5 after 2 days, you're about $10. That makes sense. After 10 days, if you save $5, you're at $50. And after 20 days, if you save $5 a day, that's 20 times 5, you're at 100. So the amount of money that he can save is basically anything below the line. So I'm thinking this might actually have to be shaded. So they're asking which is a possible amount after X days. And so notice the days is here and the amount is here. So let's just go one by one. 1850. 1850, that's choice A. So definitely under the line, A seems to work. 1275, 12 here, 75, this is B above the line, not gonna work. 8100, 8 all the way up here, this is choice C, not gonna work. 4, 125, 4, and then 125 is all the way up here. So this is choice D. So notice B, C, and D are all above the line. The only one that's below the line is choice A, so that's going to be the answer. Question 11, line P is shown in the XY plane. Line Q is perpendicular to line P and passes through. This should say 0.10, but it doesn't. Which of the following points lies on line Q? So 10 is here. If it's perpendicular, notice that line P has a slope of -1, and you know that because it's 45 degrees to the horizontal or vertical. You can also calculate that 1/1. Perpendicular is a negative reciprocal, so that means +1. It's also going to be a line that's 45 degrees, and it's going to cross each point and look like that. Or imagine I drew that straight. So which of the following points lies on line Q? Obviously 0, -1, or is going to be the answer, and so that's choice B. Question 12, the function a of t equals that represents the mass a of t in grams of a certain radioactive isotope remaining in the substance after t seconds. Which of the following is the best interpretation of 10 in this context? So when you're looking at an equation like this, you should immediately recognize it as exponential decay. And they all follow a very specific form. In other words, the 10 is the amount that you start out with. So that's your starting value. And then the number that you're multiplying it, that's getting raised to an exponent, is the change. We'll just use delta for that. So notice what's happening. After a certain time period, you're multiplying 10 by half. So you're reducing it by half. That's why it's called a half-life. And the exponent tells you exactly how fast that happens. So that's like the rate of change. So what you'll notice is that when t is 30, then your exponent's going to be 30 over 30, which means 1. So every 30 seconds, this value is going to get reduced by half. So that I automatically know just by inspecting the equation, and you guys should. So let's look at the answers. Which is the best interpretation of the value 10? The initial mass in grams of the isotope when t equals 0. Yeah, that actually makes sense, because when t equals 0, you've got 1/2 raised to 0, which is 1. So 10 times 1 is 10. So A is going to make sense based on the math, but also based on the general description that I just gave you. Choice B, the mass in grams of the radioactive isotope in the substance after 30 seconds. So that is basically what happens when you plug in 30. It's going to be 10 times 1/2 to the 30 over 30. And obviously, very quickly, you can do that in your head. It's going to be 5, so that's not what 10 is here. Choice C, the number of seconds it takes for the radioactive isotope to completely disappear. This would be like saying, when there's nothing left, 0, what value does t have to be to generate 0? So this goes kind of beyond my math memory, just because the last math class I took was like linear algebra like 20 years ago. But essentially you're saying what value of t makes the whole thing 0, And this is an exponential function, so I imagine it's going to look something like this. So you might actually have to calculate a limit or something if you want to do that. Like I said, I don't remember because, you know, this is beyond SAT math, but it's going to be something like that. D, the number of seconds it takes for the half-life of the initial, for half of the initial mass to disappear. So the initial is 10. So if half disappears, that's 5. So we're going to be left with 5. That's that 5 over there. And then if you calculate this and solve for t and find out when is that going to be there, that's what you're going to get for that answer. Regardless, that's not t or that's not 10. And so the answer is D. Question 13, lines L and M intersect line K. Which of the following is sufficient to prove lines L and M are parallel? So very quickly, you should remember parallel lines cut by a transversal. They have either corresponding angles that are the same or alternate interior angles, meaning this one and this one. So if the corresponding ones or the alternate interior ones are the same, then that proves them parallel. So let's look at it. W equals y. So if W equals y, that's actually always true because these are vertical angles. So that's going to be true no matter what orientation line L is at. So that's not going to work. W and Z are equal. Yeah, that's corresponding angles. So that works. X equals y. So if X equals y, that would actually prove that this is a right angle and so is this, because it's basically saying there's an equal number of degrees in X and Y. The only way for that to happen would be is that this is a right angle. So it doesn't prove that L and M are parallel. X equals Z. So X and Z actually have no relation because you can imagine a situation where what if X were bigger and it looked like that? That's X. And you can draw line M in the same way where Z is equal to X and these two lines are clearly not parallel. So D is out and the answer is going to be B. Question 14, data set X and set Y are displayed by the two dot plots shown. Which of the following are the same for both data sets? So the easier one to see is actually the median. The median is the middle number, and you can do that just visually looking at it. What you'll notice is that for both set X and Y, 25 is going to be the median because aside from these two dots, there are two dots to the left and two dots to the right. Over here, set Y, two dots to the left, two dots to the right, also showing that the median is 25. If you're not convinced, you could count it up and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so when you have a set of 6 values, the median is going to be 6 divided by 2 equals 3. That's an even number. So the median is between the third and fourth value. And the third and fourth value is right here, 25. Same thing for data set Y. So the median for the two of them is the same. So the answers are obviously not 1 only. And it's not neither 1 nor 2. Now the next question is the mean. So you could actually just, take your calculator and go 22 plus 23 plus 25, 25, 28 plus 28 divided by 6 and do the same thing here. That's easy. What I did is kind of just looked at it visually. If you think about the average as kind of the weight, in other words, where are most of these dots falling on average, then what you'll notice, let's start with Y because it's a little bit easier. 21 and 29 are both the same distance from 25, so they kind of just cancel each other out, assuming the average is somewhere around 25. And then these two dots are the same here and the same up here. So really, to get the average of data set Y, we're really just comparing these two dots, which is somewhere between 24 and 27. So these two dots alone, the average is going to be somewhere around here. Now let's look at the same thing in data set X. Again, it has the 2 in the center, and equidistant is 22 and 28. And so now the remaining 2 that we're comparing here is between 23 and 28. And so notice the position difference between X and Y. So the data set in X is going to be somewhere closer to 25, the average, whereas the average in data set Y is going to be somewhere closer to 26. I'm pretty sure that you can do it that way. If that's wrong, then please correct me. And so the answer, whether you do it that way or by calculator, is going to be choice B, because the mean is not going to be the same. Question 15, 480 BC, the population of the Persian Empire was 49.4 million. Population of the Persian Empire was 44% of the world population at the time. So they had like, what, 100 million people in the world? Which is the following best estimate of the world population in 480 BC? So this could be like simple algebra. If you know 49.4 million is 44% of the whole, 44% is 0.44, or 44 out of 100 of the world, then you basically just divide 49.4 by 0.44 and you're going to get 112.3 million. You could have also just eyeballed it. If you know that 49, or let's say 50, is equal to 44%, then what is 100%? It's got to be greater than 100. So automatically that'll eliminate 21, 89, and 93. So if you didn't want to actually do the math, you could have just thought about it kind of logically. And in that case, you would have gotten lucky because choice D is the only one that's above 100. Question 16, the scatter plot shows 12 values from a data set. A line of best fit is also shown. Which of the following is the best interpretation of the y-coordinate of the Y-intercept? So the Y-intercept is up here, and that point is 0, 6. And they want to know what's the best interpretation of the y-coordinate, so that's 6. So let's look at the answer choices. For the value x equals 6, the line of best fit predicts the corresponding value to be 0. So when x equals 6, that's somewhere all the way out here. Clearly not, because if we extended the line, if you could even do that, it would be all the way down here. So A is not it. For the value y equals 0, that's down here, the line of best fit predicts the corresponding value to be approximately 3. So yes, when y equals 0, the corresponding x value is 3. That is true because this is 3, 0. However, that's not what the question is asking. The question is asking, what's the best interpretation of the y-coordinate of the y-intercept, which is up here, not down there. Choice C, for the value x equals 0, the line of best fit predicts the corresponding y value to be 6. So yeah, x equals 0 over here, and the line of best fit says when x is 0, the y value is 6, so we have 0, 6, so C makes sense. Choice D, for the value y equals 3, that's over here, the line of best fit predicts the corresponding x value to be 0. So when y is 3, the point we're looking at is this, and that's 1.5, 3. So not 0, 3. So D is also off. Question 17, so I realized I forgot to make the size bigger. I made it smaller for that other problem, so you can see it on one page. Hopefully the other problems are not too small for you guys to see. So let's look at 17. The graph of the equation, blah, 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 where Q is a constant, is a line in the xy plane. What are the coordinates of the point at which the line crosses the x-axis? So the line crosses the x-axis, that's where y equals 0. So notice in this equation we've got, an unknown, but notice all the answers are in terms of the unknown, so we should be able to use like regular algebra. So when the line crosses the x-axis, that's when y equals 0. So let's see what happens when we plug in 0 for y equals q. This obviously drops out, so 4x equals q. X turns out to be q over 4. Now keep in mind, that's the x-coordinate, q over 4, when our y-coordinate was 0, because we made it that way. And so the answer is going to be choice B, q over 4, 0. Question 18, it took 20 minutes for a jet to climb from a starting altitude of 10,000 feet to a final altitude of 30,000 feet. If the jet climbed at a constant rate, what was its altitude in feet 14 minutes after the climb began? So this is actually going to be a linear model. So the way I'm picturing it is this. We're starting at 10,000 and we're going up to 30. So this is 10,000. Up here is 30. And it climbed at a constant rate, so that's why the line is straight. And it took 20 minutes. So if this is minutes, 0 there, and 20 is down here. So they want us to figure out what the altitude was at a random place, which is 14, so that's about here. So the way that we can figure this out is we need sort of the equation. And the way we can get that is we have the y-intercept, which is 10,000. We need the slope. So how do you get the slope? It's rise over run. So that's going to be 30,000 minus 10,000, which is 20,000, divided by 20. So the slope is 20,000 divided by 20. That's obviously 1,000. And the y-intercept is 10. So the equation is going to be y equals 1,000x plus 10,000. And now that we have our equation, we can figure out anything that they want. And so they're asking for 14 minutes. Keep in mind, 14 is pretty arbitrary. They could have been like, what was the altitude at 16 minutes? They're kind of just testing that you can like do anything random once you have all the information. So we plug this in, we get 14 times 1,000 is 14,000 plus 10,000. And that's obviously going to be 24,000. So at 14 minutes, this value is 24,000, which makes sense because it's about there. And so the answer is going to be choice C. Question 19, B and C are constants. If the equation is true for all values of x, what is the value of B plus C? So what I notice is that we've got an x cubed and an x squared and an x. Here we've got what's going to be a quadratic also multiplied by x. So we're going to have corresponding parts, x cubed, x squared. This is what I call grouping, and I'll show you that in a minute. What I'm going to do is I'm going to solve x plus 2 first. So that's going to be x squared plus 4x plus 4. You guys should be able to do that in your head. And that's going to be multiplied by x. And this is, I'm just rewriting the second part, x cubed plus bx squared plus cx. Now I'm going to multiply each piece out. So this is going to be x cubed plus 4x squared plus 4x equals x cubed plus bx squared plus cx. So the reason I call this grouping is because when you've got an equation like this, if you've got x cubed and x cubed, these have to be equal to each other. The quadratic terms, x squared, have to be equal to each other. And then your linear terms, 4x and cx, have to be equal to each other. So very quickly, if 4x squared is equal to bx squared, then obviously b equals 4. And then if 4x is equal to cx, then that means c is also equal to 4. And so they want to know what is b plus c. 4 plus 4 is 8. So the important thing here is just recognize that this is going to be x cubed, x squared, x on both sides, and then you can just group them together. Question 20, in the given function, k is a positive constant, which I found could be the graph of f in the xy plane. So normally I have my students memorize that hyperbolas look like that, y equals 1 over x. Here they're making it a little more complicated because they're putting an x up there. So for this type of problem, I would just say, hey, they're giving you 4 graphs. Let's just use some test points and see if we can eliminate choices. So first test point I'm going to do is, what is the y-intercept? Because notice they're kind of all different. So the y-intercept happens where x equals 0. So I'm going to do k minus 0 over 1 plus 0. What do we get? Y equals k. And if they're telling us k is a positive constant, that means the y coordinate of the y-intercept is positive. So here it's negative, so we're going to reject b. C, it's also negative, so we're going to reject c. A and D both have a positive constant for the y-intercept. So we need to choose another test point. Given that we did the y-intercept there, let's do the x-intercept. So the x-intercept happens when y is equal to 0. I'm just rewriting the equation. So we're going to make y equal to 0, and now we're going to solve k minus x over 1 plus x, multiply both sides, and so we're going to get 0, we multiplied both sides by the denominator 1 plus x, 0 equals k minus x, add x to both sides, k equals x, and again, if k is a positive constant, this tells us that the x-intercept is going to be positive. So notice it's positive here, notice the x-intercept is negative here, so we eliminate choice D, and A is going to be the answer. So that's probably the easiest way to do it. Question 21, a circle has center C at 1, 1 and radius 2. Which of the following is an equation of the circle? So this is super easy if you've memorized your equation for a circle, and that's wrong. So it's going to be x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals the radius squared, and this is actually the Pythagorean theorem. So your center is going to be h comma k. Pay attention to the signs. You're subtracting h, you're subtracting k, and the radius is obviously r. So center 1, radius 2, it's going to be x minus 1 squared plus y minus 1 squared equals 2 squared, which is 4, and so the answer is going to be choice D. So let's look at the other ones real quick. This has a center of -1, -1. How do I know that? Because according to the formula, how do you get x plus 1? It's x minus -1. So we're still following the formula, squared plus y minus -1 squared, except we're using negative numbers. And the radius is actually going to be rad 2 because it's the square root of this. So for choice A, the center is -1, -1, radius is rad 2, or square root of 2. Choice B, center is -1, -1, radius is 2, because that's the square root of 4. Choice C, center is 1, 1, radius is rad 2. So they're all a little bit off except for choice D. Question 22, what is the length of AC in the triangle below? So what do I see? 30, 60, 90 triangle. I have memorized 30, 60, 90 is 1, rad 3, 2. And that tells me that opposite the 30-degree angle is the small leg. And to go from the small leg to the large leg, I multiply 1 by rad 3. So that tells me the large leg is going to be 5 rad 3. And just so you know, the hypotenuse is going to be the small leg opposite the 30 times 2. So you go from 5 to 10. And so the corresponding sides are 5 rad 3, and 10. So notice that it matches what I've memorized. And so the answer here is choice B. Question 23, a function has a property that if point A, B is on the graph of y equals f of x in the xy plane, then this point is also on the graph. Which of the following could define f? So this is kind of annoying, and I could not think of an easier way of doing this besides using test points. Because basically what you've got to do is you've got to use this point, plug it into the equation, then use this point, plug it into the equation, and see if they're both true. So what I did was I picked a point, I picked a value for A, which I picked 1 because it's got to be anything. And that's going to be my first point. I don't know, I can't pick a B because these are set equations. So I have to actually plug in 1 for x, then get my B. And then once I've generated these two coordinates, then I can compare that to the second set, which is if I chose 1 for A, it's going to be 2 comma B over 3. So basically I'm going to have to plug in this point and make it work with, see what B is, and then plug in the second point and see if the equation is still true. So let's do that. For the first equation, we're plugging in 1, so I'm just going to write 1/3. I'm rewriting the equation, times 1 over 12, plugging in 1 for x. That's going to give me 1 over 36. So that's my B value. Now I'm going to compare that to the second situation where 1 over 36 is my y value, and I'm going to take that over 3, or 1/3 of that. And again, now we're just rewriting the equation, 1/3, 1 over 12. And in the second situation, x is 2. And just by eyeballing this, you can see that this is not going to be the same because 12 squared is 144, whereas here it's 136. So these are not equal. So basically choice A, it's not true that for this point, 1 comma b, it's also true 2 comma b over 3. So a is going to be out. Choice B, we've got 12 times 1/3 raised to the 1, and that's going to be 12 over 3 is 4. And we'll do the same thing. 4, and we take 1/3 of 4 equals 12 times 1/3, and we square this, and so look what's going to happen. This is going to become 4 over 3. This is going to become 12 over 9. These are actually equivalent, so B is probably going to be the answer. Let's just check C and D. 12 times 3 to the 1 equals 36. And now second situation, 1/3 of 36. Is that equal to 12 times 3 squared? Clearly not, because 12 times 9 is 70 or 80. What is 12 times 9? 12 times 9, why can't I think of this? 120? Yeah, minus 12, 108. So that's not the same as 1/3 of 36. So that's not equal to each other. Choice D, real quick, 1/3, 12 to the 1 equals 4. And 1/3 of 4 equals 1/3 12 squared. 12 squared is 144. 1/3 of that is obviously much bigger than 1/3 of 4. So D, not going to work. The only one that satisfies that is choice B. And if you guys know an easier way, feel free to post it on the bottom. It'll be a great help to everyone, including myself. But that's kind of the best way that I was able to think of doing it. Question 24, 90% of the volume of an iceberg lies below the surface of the water. I think that's like a metaphor for some psychology thing. If A represents the volume that lies above and V represents the total, which of the following equations best approximates A in terms of V? So here's your iceberg. Most of it's under the water. A is above, and then this whole thing is V. So if 90% is below the surface, obviously what's above the surface? 10%. So what's A in terms of V? A is 10% of V. Said another way, A equals 10 over 100 of V, or A equals 0.1 V, and that's choice C. Choice A would be, if A is 10 times V, that would mean the volume is 1/10 what's above the surface. Doesn't make sense. Choice B, this is saying A is 90% of V, so that would be if A were at the bottom. Choice D, A is 10% of V plus 0.9. I don't know what that means. That's just weird. So the answer is going to be C. Question 25, 2007, U.S. economists gathered data about money collected for the arts, entertainment, and recreation industries in 8 states. The ratio of money collected in all 8 states to the money collected in Florida was 11 to 8. Because there's a lot of people in Florida. If a total of, probably all the old people from New York go to Florida. I'm from New York. Anyway, if a total of X dollars was collected in all 8 states, which expression represents the total amount of Florida? So you can actually just set up a simple proportion for this. We know that the ratio of the 8 states to Florida was 11 to 8. And then they're actually telling us that X dollars was collected in those 8 states, and now we want to know Florida. So notice we've got 2 unknowns, but all the answers are in terms of an X. So they want to know what's the amount of Florida. Let's just get F by itself. So cross multiply, you get 11F equals 8X. Divide both sides by 11. You get 8X over 11. And so that's choice A. You probably could have plugged in a number for X and then got F, and then using that same X solve for, because again, this whole thing equals F. That would have worked also, but if the algebra is pretty simple, so I just did it that way. 26. Dataset A and B are summarized in the graphs above. Each set contains 12 whole numbers. Which statements must be true? So if you glance at the answer choices, you'll notice that we're talking about two things, the mean and the standard deviation. Every single answer choice has those. So you want to make a conclusion about those before you start reading through things. So notice that these graphs are perfectly symmetrical. So here and here, and they're symmetrical about the value 5. So what that means is that the mean is going to be the same for data set A and B, and they also have 12, so it's not going to be thrown off. So you can eliminate any choice that says they have different means. That's choice C, and that's choice D. Now we're talking about standard deviation. So standard deviation you want to think of as visually the amount of spread, or how spread out the data is. So you can see that B is more spread out. In other words, you've got 12 numbers spread out over a longer distance or a greater range compared to data set A. And so B is going to have the greater standard deviation than choice A. And so that means the answer is going to be B. So far up to this point, I've never seen the SAT ask you to calculate a standard deviation. That could change as the test gets harder, but for now, standard deviation, if you think of it as spread, you can kind of just visually assess by looking at the graphs. Question 27, which is the most appropriate quadratic model for the data shown in the scatter plot? So a quadratic model would be something that looks like this. And keep in mind, the model may not actually represent, or it may not fall on all the data points, but the easiest way to do this is pick a point and see if it fits. So I'm going to pick a point that's easy right here. Let's do 2, 1, and let's plug it in. So 1 equals 4 times 2 squared. Obviously that's not true because 1 does not equal 16. A is out. Not even close, by the way. Second answer, 1 equals 2 times 2 squared. And so that obviously not true. Choice C, 1 equals 1/2 of 2 squared. Not exactly, 1/2 of 4 is 2. And so choice D better work. 1 equals 1/4 of 2 squared, and obviously 1/4 of 4 is 1, so D is going to be the answer. If by any chance you had gotten 2 equations that worked, that probably would have been a coincidence. You would have had to pick like another test point. So the next test point I would have picked was like 3, 2, and then you plug that in the same way and see if it worked. Question 28, which of the following functions has a maximum value of m, where m is a positive constant? So this is part of a strange set of new types of questions that the SAT's been asking, where they give you a bunch of equations and they're saying which one of the equations is some property of the graph, in this case the max, obvious just by looking at a certain part of it. So this one's relatively easy. Just keep that in mind as a certain type of question. What you'll notice is that all of these is x raised to the second power. All of these are going to be parabolas. So you should know in general that y equals x squared. It's going to be a parabola whose vertex is at the origin. And so if you multiply this by m, and it's a positive constant, the effect is making the parabola narrower. And so choice A is also going to look like this, a relatively narrow parabola. But since m is positive, it's going to be facing upward, and so m is not going to be the max value. The minimum value is really going to be 0, 0. M is just telling you how narrow it's going to be. So A is going to be out. Choice B is the same as choice A, except by making it negative, you kind of flip it about the x-axis. It's basically a reflection. And so any parabola with a negative A is going to open downward. Just for reference, parabolas are ax squared plus bx plus c. Again, if A is positive, it opens upward. A is negative, it opens downward. So B doesn't tell us the max, because the max in A and B is still going to be, or the max just in B is still going to be 0, 0. A just tells us how narrow and how wide it is. Choice C, this, what you realize is if you're adding a value to the original, you're actually translating it upward. So whatever m is, let's say m is 5, you've just translated your parabola up 5 units. So this is going to be 0m, and oh, my mistake, this is negative x. So what we've done is we've translated our parabola, choice B, up m units, and now the vertex is here. So this is 0 comma m. And again, because this is negative, it opens downward. In this case, m is actually the maximum value, so choice C does make sense. So for choice D, it's a little bit harder to see what's going on, but whenever you add a certain value to the x, it has the effect of moving it m units. So notice that we're negative, so we're still starting from like choice B, and we're moving the parabola m units to the left. So this is going to be negative m 0. The max value is still 0, so it actually has nothing to do with m, because m is the x coordinate in this particular case. So D is also going to be out, and the best choice is going to be C. Question 29, a quantity is decreased by 45% of its value. The resulting value is x. Which expression gives the value of the original quantity in terms of x? So you should know that when you decrease something by 45%, you're left with 55%, 100 minus 45. So the shorthand way of doing this is you can take the original quantity and you can actually multiply it by 0.55, because that's 55% of the quantity, and then you're going to get x. So the question is, which gives the original? I just picked q for the original in terms of x. So basically that means let's get q by itself. So divide both sides by 0.55. Q equals x over 0.55, and so the answer is choice B. So for this problem, like the other one, you could have picked an x value, and then once you pick your x value, then you can derive your original value, and then each of these is equal to the original value. So as long as you plug in the same x, you should get the answer. But algebraically, this is kind of the quickest way to do it. Just know that a decrease in 45%, you can calculate the new value by multiplying by 0.55. That's kind of the shortcut. Question 30, the area of the Mountain Island Educational State Forest in North Carolina is 3 square miles. What is the area in square yards? So you could do this, by calculating what is 1 square mile to square yards, and then do it. I want to show you like the systematic way of doing it, because if that uses conversion factors, and you can kind of generalize that to any problem like this. So the only hiccup in this problem is we're not talking about a linear value like miles to yards. We're talking about square miles to square yards. So we actually have to make that adjustment. If 1 mile equals 1760 yards, we actually have to calculate what is 1 square mile. So if this is 1 mile on each end, this is 1760 by 1760. Multiply those together, and what you're going to get is 1 square mile equals 309,7600 square yards. So essentially 3,997,600 yards. This is the actual number that you want to use in your conversion factor. So what do they want us to convert? 3 square miles, that's miles squared. And now you're going to turn your equation into a fraction. We're going to put miles on the bottom, square miles, that is, and we're going to put 3,600,000 square yards in the top, because 1 square mile is equal to that many square yards. So we're essentially multiplying this by 1 in a certain sense. And the reason we do this is because units cancel out. And when we multiply that by 3, if you do that on your calculator, you're going to get 9,292,800 square yards, because that's what we're left with. And so that's choice D. So the reason I like doing it this way is because it's systematic and it'll prevent you from making any mistakes. You could have also done it in your head where, okay, 1 square mile is 1760, got that, and then multiply it by 3 and you get the same answer. But this is kind of a better way of doing it, in my opinion. Question 31, ratio of students to teachers is 18 to 1 if the school is 105. So this is relatively simple. It's just a proportion, 18 to 1, that's students to teachers, and they have 105 teachers, so 105 goes in the bottom. How many students? So cross multiply, and x is going to be equal to 1890, which is the answer. Question 32, in the given equation, b is a constant. If the equation has no solutions, what is the value of b? So this is actually very easy. All you have to do is make b 2, and I'll show you why. 2x plus 7. If the right side said 2x plus 5, notice what happens. 2x subtracts out, and then you're left with 7 equals 5, which is not true. So what that shows is that no matter what value you plug in for x, the x's are ultimately going to be eliminated, and you're left with 7 equals 5, which is never true. Notice that this does not happen if you pick any other value for b. So let's say we did 2x plus 7 equals, instead of 2, will be 3x plus 5. And now we subtract 2x from both sides, we get x, subtract 5 from both sides, we get 2. So when we picked any other value besides 2 for b, we found that this does have one solution. It's only when you pick 2 for b that the equation has no solutions, because it results in 7 not equal to 5. 33, there are 1,000 four-digit numbers from 1,000 to 1999. If one of these is selected at random, what is the probability that the number is greater than 1499? So let's do the same thing that they did here. The numbers that are greater from 1499 are basically 1,500 all the way to 1999. And what are the total numbers? They've already told us it's 1,000. So the only way you can get tripped up on this is by counting the wrong way. How many numbers are there from 1500 to 1999, including the number 1500? It's actually going to be 500. And the reason it's 500 is if you were to go from 1501 to 1999, then that's actually 499 numbers, but since we're including 1500, which is the 0 value, that's one more than 499, and so it's 500 over 1,000, which is going to be 1/2. Another point that you should realize is whenever you're listing numbers, this can be verified by saying 1 to 9. How many numbers is this? Now, if it's 1 to 9, it's going to be 9 numbers, but the way you can do this is 9 minus 1 equals 8, and then you always add 1. And so this is helpful if you're dealing with random numbers, like how many numbers are there between 375 and 262. You basically subtract 3, 1, 1, and then add 1. And if you're including these two numbers, there's 114 numbers including those. So that's just one method in case they ask you something like this with like more complicated numbers. Question 34, we got a system of equations. The solution is xy. What is the value of x plus 2y? So what I'm going to notice is they've actually set this up very nicely for us, because if we subtract the second from the first, what's 3x minus 2x? X. What's 4y plus minus 2y? It's 2y. And 35 minus 15 is 20, and this is exactly what they're asking for, x plus 2y, and so the answer is 20. So before you jump into thinking like, oh, can I eliminate the y's, can I eliminate the x's, take a second and ask yourself, why would they be asking for this very strange quantity? Chances are you can manipulate the equation in such a way to get this number directly, like we did, and that'll save you a lot of time. Question 35, C and D are the two solutions of the quadratic equation. What is the value of C plus D? So this is actually a super easy problem if you remember that the sum of the roots is negative b over a. So again, if you have got a quadratic equation, y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, that's standard form. You just take negative b, divide by a, and that's the sum of the roots, which is what they're asking for. So negative b in this case is 3 divided by a, 3/2, and so your answer is going to be 3/2 or 1.5. Now, if you didn't remember that, you could solve this, and you'd either have to factor it or use a quadratic equation. Just remember, sum of the roots is negative b over a the product of the roots is always c over a, as long as you have a quadratic in standard form. Question 36, what is the sum of these solutions? So maybe similar to the other problem. Here, I think the temptation is to divide both sides by x plus 2, but you don't want to do that, because if you divide both sides by x plus 2, you're assuming that x is not equal to 2 or negative 2, because when x is equal to negative 2, then you're dividing by 0, and most likely that's actually one of the solutions in the problem. So I'd recommend just multiply this out and see what we get. So this becomes x squared plus 2x minus 5x minus 10. Rewrite the left side, and we're going to get x squared minus 3x minus 10. Now subtract 2 from both sides, subtract x from both sides, we get x squared minus 4x minus 12. This you can actually factor. It becomes x minus 6 times x plus 2. And if that's equal to 0, either x equals 6 or x equals negative 2. And so, we did find that x equals negative 2 is one of the solutions. So 6 plus negative 2 is 4, and that's the answer. Question 37 and 38, table gives the age groups of the total population of women and the number of registered women voters in the US in 2012, rounded to the nearest million. So total population here, registered women here, and these are the age groups, and notice that they give the total down here. Question 37. In 2012, the total number of registered women voters was p% the total population. And what is the value of p? So the fact that they added this up for us makes it very easy. So we want to find what percent is 81 of 122, and I would just set up a simple proportion. That is x over 100, cross multiply, you'll find that x is 66.39. And if it says to the nearest whole number, round down, and so the answer is 66. Question 38, if a woman is selected at random from the total population of women aged 45 to 64, that's here, what is the probability of selecting a registered voter rounded to the nearest 100? So kind of the same problem as before. We're doing 30 out of the whole, so 30 out of 42. And if you don't want to do proportions, you could just do 30 divided by 42 on your calculator. That's going to give you 0.714. And so just remember that this is out of 1,000 or 71 out of 100. So this is going to be 71%, and they want it as a decimal. So it's 0.71, and so that's the answer.